G'day Anti-Socialites, this is Ryan Quarrington here. You might remember me from episode 227 and from South Australian band Shatterbrain and Alkira. I'm momentarily commandeering this episode to plug Shatterbrain's debut album Pitchfork Justice, which is out now via Wormhole Death Records. It's available for streaming wherever you stream your music, or if you're a fan of old school physical, you can pick up a CD or a vinyl along with any other band paraphernalia you can think of via our online store at shatterbrainmetal.com. Thanks for listening, over to you Andy and Larry.
Welcome to the Anti-Social Podcast, another week of podcasting. And before we kick into this week's episode, Larry and I have got to tell you a little message. Come on over and join us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Andy Dowling is the place to go to support this little old podcast of mine. And support starts from only $1 a month. Dirt cheap, just $1. And there are additional tiers if you want to support with a little extra coin and you get exclusive content, including a weekly podcast episode. Go on over to patreon.com/Andy Dowling. Larry and I say thank you very much. Hello. Welcome to the Anti-Social Podcast. This is episode... I have no idea, actually. I've got no idea what episode number this is. I am recording this intro literally just after I got off the phone with this week's guest, Bob Daisley. I am just incredibly pumped and excited to share this with you, and really inspired after this fantastic chat with Bob. And so I thought, well, let's record this intro straight away. So I have no idea when this is coming out, so I don't know what episode number it is. It'll be 200 and something. And I really hope that you guys enjoy this. But for those who aren't aware, Bob Daisley, in my opinion, is probably one of the most prolific Australian musicians, of all time. He has worked with some of the greatest in rock and metal, of all time. I mean, I'm struggling to describe Bob's prolific music CV of all the albums he's played on, all the musicians that he's worked with over the years. I mean, He's played with Ronnie James Dio, Gary Moore, Ritchie Blackmore, Randy Rhoads, Lee Kerslake, Mick Box, Tony Iommi, Bill Ward, Ozzy Osbourne, of course, Yngwie Malmsteen, Cosy Powell, Carmine Appice, just a stack of people. I mean, the list goes on. And he has hung out and spent time and developed friendships with just the most amazing household names in rock and metal over the years. And he's played on Long Live Rock and Roll by Rainbow, the first few Ozzy albums, Uriah Heep, a bunch of Uriah Heep albums, Gary Moore releases. He played on Odyssey by Malmsteen. He did Bill Ward's solo album. He's done a whole heap of stuff over the years. I'm going to dump a whole bunch of links in the show notes, and his book, of course, For Fact's Sake, which came out a few years ago. And I'll have to prep you guys. I refer to this book pretty much all the way through this chat because this book is one of the best rock autobiographies that I've ever read. And the main reason for that is that Bob kept a journal since 1976 and documented everything. He took photos, and this book is just absolutely incredible. I cannot recommend it enough if you're a fan of any of these bands, this era of music. It's just a great recap of Bob's life, from growing up in Sydney and then relocating to England, and then just developing this and creating this amazing career for himself, and just working with these amazing musicians. So it's one of the best books that I've read. Highly recommend it. You can grab it from Amazon, and if you're in Sydney, you can grab it from Utopia Records. The copies that are in Utopia are signed by Bob. So if you want a a signed copy, I should say, you can go to Utopia Records and grab that. But and of course, you can get it online from Utopia. But fantastic chat. I'm going to leave it at that. I'll have all the links in the show notes over at andysocial.net and andydowling.net. And of course, you can go to bobdaisley.com. But here we go. Please enjoy this fantastic chat with Bob Daisley. Had a couple of unexpected losses in the past week or so. And I know that...
with Tait and Martin Birch.
Yeah. And I know obviously Martin Birch... worked really closely with yourself on, that little old record in the late 70s, being Rainbow.
Yeah, he did the Long Live Rock and Roll album. Yeah. I was very impressed that he'd worked on one of my favourite albums as well, and that was Beck Ola, the Jeff Beck group. Truth and Beck Ola were, at the time, two of my favourite albums, and they still hold up today. I think, as far as Jeff Beck goes, I love Jeff Beck's playing, and And that band with Rod Stewart on vocal and Ronnie Wood on bass, and I just thought it was a brilliant band. I think Martin Burtz was really the engineer on Beckola.
Did that sort of give you a bit of a, not intimidating, but sort of know that when you guys were going in to record that you really had what seemed to be the right person for the job?
Well, I didn't really know much about Martin at that point. I didn't know his history, so it wasn't intimidating of sort of feelings of oh dear, I'm going in the studio with Martin Burtz, who worked on Beckola, because I didn't know at that point. I was just sort of I came into Rainbow when they were part way through recording that album, so there's a couple of tracks on. Well, one track, Rainbow Eyes, doesn't have bass on it anyway, and there was a couple on there that Ritchie had already played bass on. So I did what I needed to do, but I was just introduced to, here's the producer, this is Martin, and that was it. So
it's really only sort of later on down the track that you sort of
really
in hindsight. And I think you may have. Because I was trying to skim through the book to see if there was any sort of connections with Pete Way, and I think you possibly would have toured with him in the 80s.
Well, yeah, his band Wasted,
yeah.
In the 80s, opened up for us when I was with Ozzy, and we did the world tour, with the Bark at the Moon tour, with Jakey Lee, Tommy Aldrich, or partly with Carmine Apiece, and then Tommy Aldrich came back, and Don Airey on keys and that, and we had Motley Crue opening up for us. They were the sort of second act, but there was a couple of other bands on on the bill as well, and Wasted was one of them. He was he was a bit of a character. I think he actually just for a few weeks worked with Ozzy.
Right.
He took over the bass thing, because I remember Ozzy had Pete with him on the road. I think it was in England, and that was when Ozzy phoned me and he said, he asked me to come back, and I'd already discussed it with Sharon, and I obviously did go back, and but you see, that third album, Bark at the Moon, that was supposed to be with Randy Rhoads, and I'd already been asked by Sharon to come back and do that third album anyway. But it was obviously postponed because of Randy's death. You see, the lineup was still going to stay the same with Randy Rhoads, Tommy Aldrich, Don Airey, and Ozzy, and they asked me to come back and do that third album. It was kind of their way of getting rid of Lee without getting rid of me, because I wouldn't I wouldn't agree to Lee Kerslake being swapped, with Tommy Aldrich, and I just sort of said, why are you trying to fix something that's not broken, because we had a great lineup and it was a great chemistry and we all worked well together, but I wouldn't agree, so they got rid of both of us, and then asked me back. About 6 weeks after we were gone, they asked me back, and then that was when I agreed to come back and do that third album with Randy, and that was supposed to happen in 1982, but Randy was killed in March 82, and then I went back when Ozzy asked me again to go back and do that third album with when he got Jakey Lee, which was the Bark at the Moon album, and that's when Pete Way, his band Wasted, was on the road with us with Motley Crue, and that was a world tour.
Yeah, it's just seeing those two unfortunately pass away in the last week or so. I sort of went back and you start to go through their particular legacies that they've left behind and left such a mark, and then you start to just go down this rabbit hole where you just look at all these amazing people over the years that have just left such a footprint on music in general, and just looking at the number of people that you've worked with over the years. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of these giants in the music world are no longer with us. And I mean, when these things pop up and they're people that you've crossed your paths with over the years, I don't know, how do you sort of take it all in as these things happen?
Oh, it's been pretty devastating sometimes. When Randy was killed, that was just awful. That was horrible. It was, a nightmare. Because Lee Kerslake and I were in Uriah Heep then, and we were in the air traveling from London to Houston in Texas, and So as we were in the air, Randy was in that plane and died that morning. And when we checked into the hotel that evening, Lee and I said, well, we'll pop down to the club that we'll play. We're playing at a big club called Cardi's. And we went down there just to have a look to see where we were playing. It's about a sort of 1,000 capacity, quite a big club. And as we walked through the front door, the girl on the ticket desk sort of thing said, "Oh, aren't you guys in Uriah Heep? Didn't you work with Ozzy?" And she said, "I think some of them got killed this morning." Mm. And she didn't know much about it. And she said the DJ inside probably knows more. So I went in and talked to him. And and he said that they didn't. I first envisaged a commercial airline plane coming down or something, but it wasn't. It was just that little private plane. And the bus driver stopped at the airfield because they were the bus company and the air company were linked. So he was flying the plane, but. There's all sorts of speculation about how the plane came down. One of them is that Rachel, the wardrobe lady, she was in the plane and she was sitting in the front with the pilot, and it was dual control, and she had a heart attack. And the autopsy showed that she had a heart attack before the plane crashed. Mm. So they tend to think that maybe her heart attack, she stepped on the controls, having the heart attack, and threw the plane down. And that type of plane with that V-shaped tail are very hard to pull out of a dive, apparently. So, but who knows? Anyway, I went and sat next to Lee at the bar because he was already at the bar, and he looked at me and he said, "God, you've got all pale. You're white. What's wrong?" And that's when I told him that I just found out that Randy had been killed. But over the years, I've lost lots of people that have, been very, very sad. Another one was Bon Scott in London. He was, he lived not far from me, and I went to his place, and he came to my place, and I just found out one day by looking at the newspapers that he died in a car the night before. What it was some idiot left him in the car overnight in February, which is freezing cold. It's winter, it's like below freezing probably, and just threw one blanket over him because he was pissed, but he didn't deserve to die from being pissed, and this idiot just left him in a car with a single blanket over him, and because he was pissed, he didn't wake up, and he just died in his sleep of hypothermia, and that was very sad. Even in the early days, there was a singer here called Mike Ferber. Mm. He was a pop singer, he had a band, Mike Ferber and the Bowery Boys, and they had some hits and that, and he was a close mate of mine, very close to me and my wife. We weren't married then, but, we were together then, and he was a real close friend of ours, and a lovely bloke he was. He was murdered. Mm. I won't go into the circumstances because it's... it's a bit of a situation that there was a conspiracy, and I won't go into who did it or why or whatever, but Mike was murdered, although in the press it said that he'd hung himself. But no, he didn't hang himself. He was murdered. Over the years there's been lots of people gone that I was, Gary Moore was another one, Yeah. Didn't see that one coming because there hadn't been any warning signs or anything, and he was only 58, and went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. So I suppose if you're going to go, that's a good way to go.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
in your sleep, just go to sleep and not wake up. But pretty. There's been lots, and it's some young, some live to a reasonable age at least, but some way too young.
Yeah, from my perspective, and I'm a little bit younger than yourself, and I've been really lucky. I've had very few people in my life that I've met and worked with or had friendships with that have passed on.
Yeah,
and so looking at just on a high level, just looking at the people that you've worked with and those people that are no longer around, it's a difficult thing to grasp and understand. Just I guess what that impact is and what you go through, and I guess what what it does for your own perspective, thinking about your own life and going, well, what do I still need to do? Am I making the most of my time while I'm still here? And it's just an interesting thing to hear from like someone like yourself, who's just, you've worked with these amazing people that are just no longer around.
Well, yes, I've had an unusual amount of loss, I suppose, because I've had an unusual amount of connection with people, I suppose, too. Cozy Powell and Ronnie Dio were two more as well. When Cozy got killed in that car crash, we'd been talking about putting Rainbow back together. He'd talked to Ronnie, and Ronnie had talked to Ritchie, and we all had green lights, and it looked like it was going to happen, and then bang, he's gone, and that was the end of that. So that was another real sad one. But I suppose the more people that you connect with, the more chance you have of loss. And I've had a major amount of connection with various people, and I've been very fortunate in being. It's been a very eventful life, but I've had an unusual amount of loss because of it.
It certainly comes with the territory, then, doesn't it? I mean, really, you don't want to hold back and not meet anybody and not do anything.
Oh no, I've been very fortunate, and it's been one connection after another, and it's I regard myself as being very fortunate with working with so many greats.
One thing that I noticed looking at going through the book and these different opportunities that pop up along the way, and you find yourself working with these amazing people. Like, these are larger than, at least from my perspective anyway, these are larger than life characters. Some of them have got a stigma, associated with their personality, big egos. And reading your sort of reflections throughout the whole book, and I've heard you have do a few interviews over the years. You've, at least, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you've got this unassuming sort of personality where, you've got this level of confidence in what you do and your ability and who you are, but you're also non-threatening. And do you think that, I mean, if that's correct, do you think that's helped you over the years as far as being able to find yourself in these situations with all these different people where maybe you don't have that immediate ego clash that may be seen with other musicians or people in the music industry?
Well, I've always been conscious and focused on keeping my feet on the ground and not turning into the silly rock star sort of ego-based type of, and I've always regarded myself and focused on being reliable and professional and good at what I do. And I suppose because it was I never ever really minded of being in the shadows or at the background or whatever, because I was never that sort of person that did it for the spotlight or for the fame or whatever. I always, from the time I started playing, it was always about the music. That's what because I remember being in high school, and I did about 15 months learning guitar first in guitar classes, and then I got a bass, and then I started learning bass. And my mum was very supportive of that, getting me a bass and a little amp and encouraging me, and she was great. And I remember kids at school that would, people were trying to form bands and trying to learn instruments and whatever, and so many of them they were really into the, you can get girls, or you can get famous, or you can get lots of money or whatever, but I was genuine about just the music side of things, I mean, of course you need to be paid, and it's nice to get recognition as well. But, the main thing for me was the music and being professional and being reliable. And I always try to get on with people, it's, so many of the people that I work with, had a great sense of humor, and we laughed a lot. We always kept it professional as far as the music. See, Gary Moore's a good example of that, and Ritchie Blackmore's a good example of that. Have a good laugh, great sense of humor, both of them. But you need to put the music first, sort of thing.
From the amount of time that I've been playing music, which probably 15 years, so not that long in the grand scheme of things, but something that's certainly helped me along the way. Building connections with people is just having a similar approach where I'll let other people, take the spotlight if they're feeling very passionate about getting in, in the front. And I think just being a part of it and being part of a bigger picture, and whether it be creating something or performing or just being a part of that whole movement that you're contributing to has always been sort of a bigger motivator for me personally. So sort of looking at what you've done and sort of that mindset or that approach that you've had, being really mindful along the way, I really sort of identified with that and connected with it, because it seemed to be a similar sort of approach which you just mentioned.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, like I said, yes, I was mindful of, being professional, being reliable, and trying to get on with everybody. Apart from the music side of things, you have to have a good time. You have to have some kind of rapport with the people you're working with. It's like, I think every time I was in a situation where we had to audition someone, whether it was for a guitarist or a drummer or whatever it was, the three main things were, first of all, he's got to be a great player. Secondly, you've got to get on with him. He's got to be a decent bloke, or he's got to have a good sense of humor, or be one of us kind of thing. And thirdly, he's got to look the part, and that was usually the three credentials that they needed. Like I said, I focused on the music, but it's always good to get credited for what you do, and I didn't always get that. There were things that I did that people even nowadays are just beginning to find out. Oh, that's you, and it's not him. Because there was misaccreditation or it's nice to have acknowledgement and be credited for what you do. Plus, it serves a purpose in being one of your credentials for getting other work or being used for certain projects and that,
Well, it's like the old resume, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It is. It becomes part of your resume. That's right.
I think that was one of the good things about your book, because I certainly, heard a lot of the stories and a lot of the news articles back and forth over the years about all the controversy with Ozzy and those first few albums and everything that's happened since then. But I think reading the book and just really looking at it and taking it in through your lens, through your perspective, it was just really interesting to see, I guess, a lot of the extra context around it and sort of how things built up to where it was and some of the reasons.
The reasons for things behind the scenes and that. People have often asked me, why did you do this? Why did you go back and do that? Why did you, there's a lot of whys and it's a very complicated story, and it goes, that rabbit hole goes pretty deep, Yeah, it's good to. I think the book is enlightening, and that's a lot of the reason that I called it for fact's sake. Is that it's factual. I kept diaries over the years. I took lots of photos over the years. So, it's not based on well, I've got a rough idea of what happened, and I think he was there, and I think it was around about this time. No, it's factual. It's to the date and to the day. And because I kept diaries and they came in very handy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one thing that I've always noticed over the years of reading the old musician biographies or autobiographies is that when you're reading these tales being retold decades later, that there's a little bit of embellishing here and there and some stuff that just seems completely over the top, and you don't know, you've got no idea, you're sort of reading it after the fact. But as you said, you've got photos in this book, and I'm looking at these photos going, oh, geez, like this is, you can't hide behind a photo. This is incredible. And then obviously just the way that you've, as you said, you kept journals, you kept a diary along the way, and the way that it's mapped out, it's just, it's very hard to hide behind facts. And it's very insightful just to see how it's all been pieced together, and just to see how closely how close you were to Ozzy and those early stages of just getting the concept of this band together that was going to be a band, and the direction it was going to go, and all these dreams and hopes of where it was going to lead to. And then obviously it started to change as the years progressed, and when different things. Well,
happened. It became very sad, really, because I loved Ozzy dearly, and we got on great together, and we were mates, and it was it sort of fell apart for lots of reasons. But I have fond memories, and we got on great for many years. And it was funny when that band first formed. It was just Ozzy and Randy and me, and we were auditioning drummer after drummer. And that was one of those times when we must have auditioned 40 different drummers until we got Lee Kerslake, and he was the last one that we had to audition. And the record company was screaming for their product, and they said, well, if this last guy doesn't work out, maybe you should think about getting a session player to go in with you just to do the album. We didn't want to do that. We wanted the band completed, and we wanted that last member, And Kerslake ended up being the perfect guy. So, it was he was the last piece of the puzzle, and it all fitted together. And it was, you could feel it. You could feel the chemistry, and it was, Lee had a lot of experience on the road and in the studio and that with Uriah Heep, and I know Randy as a young lad loved Uriah Heep, so that meant something to Randy to have the Uriah Heep drummer in the band, and Ozzy had done an awful lot with Black Sabbath, who had been a huge band, and Randy was inexperienced. He was a little green. He was younger than us. He hadn't really seen the big time and that, but he was this up-and-coming young whiz-kid guitarist that was, blowing the doors off rock guitar. It was almost perfect how it all just fitted together and became what it was, and I think it was really meant to happen.
I think when you look through the way that you've put it together and documented it with the photos, I mean, obviously, what's happened has happened, and the tragedy around a lot of that with Randy, but sort of looking at it through a that silver lining perspective, it's just amazing that you were able to just capture this time. It wasn't just this, I'm sure you'd still have very strong memories of that time, but to have it also in the fact that you've documented it, you've got photos as well, and it can really sort of, it's a time capsule of a very important time.
Well, the other thing with the book, and you're talking about the photos are on each page rather than have a photo section, because it was actually my daughter Rebecca that suggested that. She said, well, instead of having a photo section, why don't you have the photos within the text? And I thought, great, good idea. And it really helps the reader, because if you're reading about Gary Moore or Ozzy or Randy or Uriah Heep or Rainbow, whatever, what you're reading about, the photos are there on that page, so it's within the text, and I think that's a really good way to do it.
Oh, it was a big help for me, because whenever I buy a book and they've got the photo section in the book, I'm always like tempted to flick through and have a quick look at the photos first and then go back and start reading. But in the book,
well, plus if you've got to go looking for the photo that you're reading about, you tend to lose the train of thought and that thread sort of thing, of finding the photo in the photo section, looking at it, then going back to where you're reading, and it's not as fluent then. It's, it helps a lot to have the photo there on the page as you're reading.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I wrote it down quite a while ago, but it might be wrong. You started keeping a journal in 1976, is that correct?
Yeah.
Was that an intention that you had in your mind as far as wanting to document from that time? Was there something that happened at that point in time where you thought, I want to start doing this?
No, not at all. No, to be honest with you, I can't remember how or why I got a diary. It could have been a Christmas present from my wife or something, or I might have just seen one and I thought, no, maybe I'll start a diary. But I vaguely remember that it could have been my wife that gave it to me, and I started filling it in then. And then each new year I just bought a new one. So it wasn't really for any particular reason, but I'm certainly glad that I did.
Oh, yeah.
Because no, it wasn't something that I was intentionally doing for a particular reason. It was just start the diary, and then it was just sort of like when that one's finished and the new year comes, buy another one, and then put the stuff in that, which I did. And I've done it to this day, and I still do it, so.
Was it a hard thing to get started with, to have, because I know a lot of people always have great intentions when they want, I'm going to do a diary, and you get a few weeks in, and then you start to miss a day, and then you miss a few days, and you miss a month, and eventually the book starts to collect a bit of dust. But I mean, for you to do it after
well, there are blank pages in mine.
Yeah.
because I either got busy or forgot to fill them in or whatever. I'd say that all of my diary, well, the first few years, there's a few blank pages here and there, but a lot of it's any main events I would be mindful and fill it in sort of thing, you know. Like if there was a sort of, you know, a band broke up, or you start a new band, or you go into the studio, or a new person joins, or you get a new experience, or there's a tragedy like a death or a murder, or you know, I was always mindful of putting those in. But there are pages where, you know, I might have been traveling, I might have got really busy or whatever, and you know, and they're just blank. But all the main events, I was mindful and thought, put them in.
Yeah, yeah. Did you, when those things happened, and you're, you know, obviously mindful to record what, you know, what's going on and how you're feeling and what you're doing in that, you know, in those times, were you trying to? I mean, I'm just picturing just how chaotic and busy your life has been over the years. Was it a case of just trying to find somewhere quiet to grab a pen and start scribbling out some words, and just when you've got a little window of time to do it, or how did you?
Yeah, I didn't do it on a daily basis. It was like, a few days have gone by, I haven't done my diary, I'll look. And because it was just very, very recent, I would remember what happened in the last few days and just sort of fill it in. And some of the pages are very brief. It might just say, I'll travel to so-and-so and start a tour or whatever, you know. But I think after I'd had lawsuits in the early to mid-'80s, and certain events and dates and that were brought up by lawyers and in court and all that, I became even more mindful of filling out the pages and that, because it became very useful.
There we go. An extra bit of value. It's being added
sure.
To it, yeah. One thing that I noticed in the book was early in the piece, I think sort of, I might have the age wrong, but in your teens, I think you were going through some struggles, and I think you mentioned later on you were diagnosed with, was it depersonalization disorder?
Yeah.
And I think mental health, you know, these days is something that's talked about a lot more freely and openly.
Sure.
You know, back in
and apparently,
60s,
and I've only just found this out recently, that depersonalization disorder, and some people have a dissociation disorder, whatever. Those sorts of things are actually a physical brain thing and not a mental disorder.
Right.
So it comes from brain function, because you know, it can be emotionally caused, or you know, it can be trauma. It can be trauma to your head, like in a car accident or whatever, or a beating, or it can be emotional trauma, or all sorts of reasons. But it's actually a brain function thing.
I mean, in the 60s, you know, those types of things wouldn't be discussed, I'd assume.
Not a clue. I went to doctors and specialists and tried to explain what I was going through and what I was feeling, and because it's sort of all in your own head, you don't appear to be, you know, have anything wrong with you. But you try to explain that, and they didn't even have a name for it back then, depersonalization. But you know, and I was getting very depressed because of it, because it's very disturbing, you know. And it's and they were saying, "Oh, you've got this problem because you're depressed." No, and I was saying, "No, you're putting the cart before the horse." You know, I'm depressed because of this problem, not the other way around. Yeah. It's well, there was a movie made about it too, with Matthew Perry in it, called Numb. You know, the various facets of depersonalization, but it was a true story about I think it was a Hollywood director that had it, and they made that film, and Matthew Perry played the part, and it was called Numb. But you know, nowadays it's a lot more widely known, and apparently it's more common than was first realized. That you know, there's lots of people that have suffered from it in varying degrees and varying strengths, and that, you know, and there's been books written about it. One's called A Stranger in the Mirror. Another one is called Feeling Unreal. Another one is A Stranger to Myself, because it's a sort of dissociation thing, and it can be caused by all sorts of different types of trauma: physical trauma, mental trauma, emotional trauma.
Did you find when you were, like the movie or all those books that have been written, as you're sort of reading and watching these things, was it things that there's little light bulbs ticking for yourself going, oh, wow, like, I can connect with this, or this makes a bit more sense now because somebody else is telling their story?
Oh, sure. I mean, I was only 16 when I was hit with it, so I just thought, I think a lot of people tend to think that they're either going mad or that they're the only person, experiencing that. And when you do read the books and you read case histories and you find out how many people have been, suffered from it and how common it actually is, little lights do go off, and you think, wow. I think the main points that I'd experienced was, I wish that I'd known all this back then. But I think the research into it back then had been put on the back burner, and there wasn't a lot going on, which is why that a lot of these so-called specialists didn't understand what was being said, or even what the question was, which is why I didn't get any answers, because they didn't even understand the question.
Yeah. Did you find that journaling and sort of taking the steps that you have in your life had helped a little bit with I guess helping with the symptoms, along the way, and managing it over time, especially when you didn't know?
Yeah, I suppose really you come to terms with living with it, and it comes in varying strengths, and it's I think it's basically some kind of defense mechanism. That there's a problem, so it sort of protects you from the problem, but the protection in itself becomes the problem, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yep.
It's a new problem, so yeah.
I think from what I could recall, you started to get into Buddhism in the late 70s. Was that something?
That was mid-70s, yeah, 1975.
Yeah, did that help?
Oh, sure, yeah. I think it helped in lots of ways. That I suppose a basic understanding of life and the basic laws of cause and effect, and being responsible for your own life, and if you make a cause, you should expect an effect. That's for every action there is a reaction, which is the law of cause and effect. And I think understanding that and understanding the basic philosophy of Buddhism was certainly a help. Yeah, I used to enjoy going to they used to have discussion meetings and that around London, and and it was that was enjoyable.
Is it something you still, something that you still, I guess, practice or
I don't go to meetings here anymore, and I occasionally read stuff on it, and I still, there's a mantra that you chant that I still chant each day, Myoho Renge Kyo. But that's been in lots of movies of various stories and approaches. It's like, if you've seen the life story of Tina Turner. It's called What's Love Got to Do with It? That's a very interesting movie. And that's the same sect of Buddhism that she's into.
Yeah. How did your parents react to you going down this path of developing an interest in Buddhism? Because I'm throwing a few stereotypes together, but remembering what you've put in your book around your upbringing, your parents' background, growing up in Sydney, and I think it's Chester Hill, and I guess from the most part, a fairly traditional kind of Aussie family for the most part.
It was, yeah. My dad was a working class guy, and my mum had little jobs from time to time to sort of help out, and my mum had been born in England, and the family emigrated to Australia. And I was born here, but they were both pretty down to earth, sort of old school type people, and they may have thought it was a bit strange when I first got involved in Buddhism. I think some people did, but I think when you get to know the basics of what Buddhism is about, it's pretty logical, really.
Do I know that you're still in Sydney these days, or you've returned to Sydney, many years ago. But do you ever venture out towards Chester Hill and drive around the area?
Oh yeah, I had a friend of mine, an English friend, David Haley. He and I used to go on what we used to call nostalgia tours. Go and visit the house that I grew up in, and the high school that we went to together, or certain streets where people lived. That band, the Easy Beats, who became huge with their Friday on My Mind hit, and they were from round that way. And our high school was right opposite the migrants' hostel, which has become a detention centre now. But in those days it was a migrant hostel, and that's where the Easy Beats first took off from in that hostel. And the bass player lived in the next street to me. I lived in Mora Street, and he lived in Virgil Avenue, and I used to see him driving around in his Holden with his gear on the back seat. And
one thing that I found really interesting, and I mean, this might be a silly question, so I'll apologise in advance, but when you went to England, and really young, sort of looking back, and a couple of days before you were ready to go, and this is a big decision, leaving home and not just going to a different city or a different town. I mean, you're going to the other side of the world, and a couple of days beforehand, the gig that you're going for, it fell through, and they. Well,
yeah, that was Carver Stewart. I'd been in a band called Carver Stewart, and I was going through a traumatic time with a breakup in a relationship, and. And I said, listen, fellas, because they wanted to get overseas as quickly as possible and try to do stuff. And I just said, I think it's a bit premature, really. I said, let's establish ourselves here a bit more, because we were starting to take off, and our album was, had been received very well, and the band it went down really well when we played live, and I just said, I think it's a bit premature. And they said, no, we want to get over it. So I sort of bowed out, and they got someone else to play here for a little while. Then I went to the airport to see them off, and that was in May 1971. And they left. And then about a month later, I think they'd been in London trying to find another bass player. And they ended up phoning me in, I think, probably mid-June. So they'd been over there about maybe 4 or 5 weeks, and they said, look, the band just doesn't sound the same without you, and we can't find someone that's like ideal or fits the band like you do. Would you consider coming over? And I said, well, how soon do you need me over there? And they said, ASAP. So I thought to myself, well, I'm not working, I've got no money, I've got no girlfriend, I've got no career, I've got no band, I may as well get over there. At least it's something to go to, and see what we can do together, So I sold my car, and I sold my amp, and I got my air ticket, and my mum even borrowed a bit of money from a friend of hers who did get paid back, but she borrowed some money so I'd have some money in my pocket when I got there, and not just my air ticket. I needed a bit of dough as well, So I got my passport, got me. A bit of dough together and all that, and then about 2 nights before I was supposed to go, the phone rings, and my mate was there with me, Peter Knox. I'd gone to high school with him, lovely bloke he was, we were close mates, and my sister and my mum and dad, and that the phone rings, and it's them, and that was Dennis and Danny from Carver Stewart, and they said, it doesn't matter, we found someone. And I'd, done all that, and I was ready to go. And I remember my dad's words. He said, oh, fuck them, you go anyway and show them how it's done. And my mate Peter Knox, he was very supportive too. He said to me, look, if you're wasted here, if you don't go over there and do something, I'll never speak to you again. So that was it. I thought, oh, well, I'll go anyway,
Well, that was the silly question I was going to ask you, because I actually wrote down, I quoted what your dad and Noxie said, because I just thought that was classic. I thought that's the push that you need. Basically, go fuck them, or I'm not going to speak to you again unless you go.
Yep.
But I guess the silly question that I had was, it's all that what if, and I can only imagine how pumped up you would have been to get ready for this? This is a big thing. You've sold off all these things. You've collected money. Your mum's borrowed some money as well, and just all that mental energy into making this big step in your life. And to get that phone call, other people, without your dad or your mate, telling you otherwise, may just go, oh well, it looks like I'm not going now. And
I should imagine that most people would do that. Being young, by yourself, nothing to go to. I should imagine that I might have even done that as well, without the push and the encouragement and the, it just felt I was meant to go. That was the thing to get me over there.
What do you think would have happened if you didn't go?
Oh, God.
That's a silly question.
Well, it's not a silly question, but it's something that I would even dread thinking about. I really don't know, because I don't know what I would have done here. I'd been offered stuff here that were big bands. Jeff St. John and Copperwine, they were huge here. They used to do big gigs, and they were really popular, and I was offered the gig with them, but I actually turned them down to stay with Carver Stute, because Carver Stute was where my heart was. I loved that band. We did an album called Wide Open, and it was received very well, and I still love that album. And my daughters play that album. They say, "Dad, this is one of the best things you ever did." It's just got a certain magic, a certain chemistry within the band, and it sort of epitomizes a certain time. That sort of end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s kind of thing. But I hate to think what would have happened if I'd stayed here.
Well, I mean, when you sort of look back and when I was reading through it and you got to that moment, it's almost like this dramatic movie scene where you're at that crossroad, and it's this defining moment that, do you stay or do you go? And life could dramatically change either way you go, for the better or for the worse. And you took that step to keep going, and your dad and your mate giving you encouragement as well certainly would have helped you make that decision. But just reading it, I was like, you sort of living through you telling the story and just thinking, oh wow, what would I have done at that time? Because it would have been a very difficult moment to sort of think and go, okay, what do I do now? What is the decision? What's the right?
I know it was, and I didn't have long to think about it, because it was. I wasn't flying out the next day. I think it was 2 days.
Yeah.
I think it was 2 nights before I was supposed to. It wasn't the night before I was supposed to go, but it was the night before I was supposed to go, and I was shit scared then. I thought, fuck me, what am I going to do? This is weird, and because I still had people around me, it didn't feel so bad. But I will admit that when I got on that plane, and that plane started going down the runway, and I thought, fuck me, I'm going to England, the other side of the world, by myself, to nothing.
Yeah.
And I thought, fuck me, once the plane got airborne, I just wanted it to fly around forever. I didn't want to land, I thought, because there was so much uncertainty, what am I going to do? Where am I going to live? What job am I going to, but it all fell into place, and I felt protected, And it was obviously I was destined to do that, and it had to happen. So they were just really the catalyst to get me over there. If they hadn't asked me to go there, I wouldn't have made that decision of, I know, I'll go to England and see what I can do. I wouldn't have made that decision. It was made for me, and even though I didn't go back to them, I wasn't meant to. If I had gone back to them, if I hadn't got that phone call and I had rejoined them, I don't know what would have happened from that either, because Festival Records, who had the Infinity label that Carver Stute was on, they wouldn't release the band, so they couldn't get signed to another label, and it was just it was like hands are tied. So it wouldn't have been a very good situation to go to anyway.
Yeah. One thing that I've noticed along the way, reading through the book, just how just opportunities pop up, just things come along, and it's out of association where, you've worked with people in the past, and then through people that you know or people that you work with, they know other people. It's this sort of ongoing networking sort of thing that opens up opportunities. But it's almost like, you, and I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you reinvent yourself each time when you walk into a new situation. There's a knock on the door, or the phone rings, and you make that call. You go, do I do this?
Yeah, a lot of it felt like being in the right place at the right time too, and being, I suppose, connected to people, and plus I had a good reputation of being reliable and being professional and being good at what I did, which was good credentials. But a lot of it is a matter of harmony, I suppose, of being in the right place at the right time, and because situations just seemed to pop up in harmony with what was going on, in rhythm, sort of thing.
Did you have any more of those moments, like when, like that phone call a couple of days before you pack up your life and move to England? Did you have other moments where you were really sort of put into a position where you're about to really step outside of your comfort zone, and it's like, okay, do I make this call? Do I make this decision?
Well, what comes to mind there was when I was in Widowmaker and we were doing the second American tour. And at the end of that tour, it was in about, I think it was around August, September 1977. And I went to see a mate of mine, Dick Middleton. He was an English guitarist that I'd worked with Mungo Jerry with. And I went to see him and his family in LA. And he was a mate of Ritchie Blackmore's. And he told me, he said, Ritchie's looking for a bass player. Would you be interested? Well, we'd had a few hiccups on the tour with Widowmaker, and there'd been fights and arguments and bitching sessions and punch-ups and all sorts, And I said, well, I'd be at least interested, sure. So Dick, his name was Dick Middleton. Dick and Ritchie and I went out and just had a beer and went up the Rainbow and sort of sat and chatted and all that, because Ritchie wouldn't even audition anyone unless he thought that he'd get on with them. So so he and I had a chat and we had a laugh, and he said, come down and have a play. So I went down, had a play, and Ronnie, Dio, and Ritchie, Cozy Powell, went to a little office, had a chat, and then they came out after talking, and they said to me, well, the gig's yours if you want it. And I said to them, well, I'll think about it. And they must have thought, you jumped up, little fuck, who do you think you are? But I did have to think about it, because I had my band Widowmaker, and that was my band, and other people around town and that were saying things like, Ritchie Blackmore, he chews people up and spits them out. You could last, weeks or a couple of months, and you might be out on your ear or whatever, So I had to think about it, and I was in two minds, and I hadn't accepted it. I hadn't said, yes, I'll join. And I remember having a long conversation with my wife. She was working in London, and I had a long chat with her, and she just it went on for about an hour, and she said, you got to do it. This is a good stepping stone. Even if it doesn't last, you got to do it. It's too good of an opportunity to pass up. Well, I still hadn't made the decision, and then we played at the Whiskey that night with Widowmaker, and Ritchie Blackmore came to the show. I think maybe Cozy did, I'm not sure, and I know Ritchie was there. And he said to me, look, I'll be up the Rainbow, come up after the gig. He was up the Rainbow Bar and Grill. He said, I'll be up the Rainbow Bar, come up after the gig. So, we played. And after we came off, went into the dressing room, and all the fights and squabbles, and that started again with the band. And I thought, oh, fuck this. And the decision was made for me. I thought, I don't have to think about it.
Nice and easy.
I don't have to make the decision. It's made for me. So I went up. I thought, fuck this. And I said to him, I'm going up the Rainbow, and that meant going to the Rainbow and going to the Rainbow. So I walked into the Rainbow, and Ritchie Blackmore was sitting there at a booth. And as I walked in, he started clapping. And I thought, fucking hell. I mean, because Ritchie's not the sort of person that's easily impressed or would express that sort of thing. But he'd really liked, our gig and what I'd done and all that. And from that moment, I said, yep, count me in, I'm in, sort of thing. And I think I started rehearsing the next day. That was me out of Widowmaker. But it came to one of those points where I thought, God, what do I do? Do I stick with Widowmaker? Because, we had a record deal with Jet Records, and we were, being looked after and that, and I didn't know what to do. And it was such a good opportunity to join Ritchie and Ronnie and Cozy, and the keyboard player was a new guy, David Stone, but he was a good player. And the decision was made for me, really.
I mean, you've played with so many bands over the years, and just these different, these heights of success, and these amazing shows that you played on these iconic records, and just it's amazing stuff. And then when you read the book, you can see the ups and downs, and the challenges, and also the high points along the way. But I mean, maybe just to put you on the spot a little bit, looking for a little bit of wisdom from yourself. Being around the traps for a little bit. You've played with a few people, played in a few bands. What's been going on in the past few months, in the world, and watching how everybody's adjusting to everything. I think from a musician point of view, there's a lot of guys out there that are just trying to make ends meet because they can't get out and play shows anymore. And I think a lot of musicians are sort of, it's only been a few months, but a few months is a long time, especially if you're not used to it. And I think a lot of bands are sort of thinking, and musicians are thinking, is this the end of my chapter as a musician? Do I need to go off and do something else now? Does my life change forever? And although we don't know what's going to happen with all the stuff that's happening in the world, if you look at what you've done over the years, I mean, no doubt there would have been points in your life where you think, is this going to be sort of where it wraps up, or like especially? Oh,
there has. One of those that stands out that immediately comes to mind is when I came out of Rainbow, which was 1978. I think it was late 78, early 79, somewhere around there. The dates will be in the book anyway. And then the big new thing at the time was punk music. Disco was huge, and new wave, and all those bands were doing very well. And some of the stuff that I had been into, and that was almost considered dinosaur, or getting to be that way at that point. And I remember thinking to myself, because I thought, this is the longest that I haven't played. This is the longest I've been out of a band, and it was dragging on for months, And I was getting very worried, and I thought, well, maybe that's it for me. Maybe that's my career over. Maybe that this is the last time that I do anything, because the music that I wanted to play didn't seem to be happening, or certainly wasn't popular in that. But it was at the end of that period when I formed the Blizzard of Oz with Ozzy and Randy and Lee Kerslake. And it was the biggest thing that I'd ever done. It was really the calm before the storm. But I was getting worried. I was getting concerned, and I was beginning to think maybe that's it for me. Is that it? Because I'm not going to join some punk band or a disco band or some new wave act. I wanted to do what I wanted to do and what I was good at and where my heart lay. And I was getting very concerned, but all of a sudden the lid blew off it, and I was in the best situation I could be in.
It's hard. It's hard when you're in the moment, because you can't think in the future. You don't know what the future's going to bring.
Well, that's it. You don't know, do you?
Yeah. And I guess that's what's hard.
I think really all you can do is try to stay focused. Try to do as much as you can under whatever the circumstances are. And give it your best shot, and don't be defeated, because I had to work down in a shop in Portobello Road in London for a while to make ends meet, and because the Rainbow thing had finished and I hadn't got a new gig, so I wasn't like, there weren't royalties pouring in or anything like that, and I had to sort of, get a little job and stuff like that, and I was, it was a bring down. I was brought down. I was depressed. I was worried. I was concerned. But I was still putting myself around, trying to find or make connections with people, and there were some auditions that I went to, and sometimes I'd come back very late and have to get up early and go and do my job, So, but I had to keep my head down and try to keep on the rails and keep focused to, just keep afloat, sort of thing, mentally and emotionally. I remember I was in the pub one night, and the close mate of the family, Pete Mills, he was a lovely bloke, he's mentioned in the book a lot, but he and I were in the pub, and he said, "Son," it was sort of like a father figure. He was older than me, and he was a really nice guy, and we were close mates. And he said to me in the pub, where he said, "Son, you got to keep putting yourself about. You got to make the connections." And so I said, "Well, there's a band playing down at the Music Machine tonight in Camden, in London." I said, "And they're a Jet Records band." And also, I'd been on Jet Records with Widowmaker. I said, "Well, they're on Jet Records, so there'll be people there we know. So let's go there." He said, "Yeah, all right." And he took me up there in his car, and that was the night I met Ozzy, and that's how it all started.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, just taking a quick step back when you mentioned coming back off Rainbow, and then having to get a job just to sort of get some money coming in and just keep yourself afloat. I mean, that would have been incredibly humbling for yourself after. Just
it was horrible. It really pissed me off. I was starting to think that, fuck me, this is the longest I haven't been in a band. This is the longest I haven't performed. This is the longest that I've been out of work. And it was. I remember there was a shop there in Portobello Road called Hindu Kush, and they sold pretty trendy Afghani clothes, and nice stuff and all that. But and I used to stand outside the shop on certain days and sell some of their off the rack stuff and that, Or one day I looked and there was about 10 Japanese kids coming along the street, and they all had rainbow T-shirts on. And I thought, oh, fuck. Oh, how great, Oh, you're doing well, aren't you? So I just sort of turned around a bit and put my head down until they'd passed. Because I thought, they'd obviously been to a rainbow show in Japan that I'd just played at only months earlier. And it was that was humbling, and I was getting worried. I thought, is my career over? Was that the last I ever did? But after that came the Blizzard of Oz and the Big Bang.
Oh, geez. I mean, no doubt going through that moment in time would have been a big help in hindsight, because it would have grounded you a lot more, and you would have had more of an appreciation as well for what you had and what you lost for a short period of time, and then what you got back tenfold, going in and working with Ozzy. And then that's it. It does. It prepares you, and it does humble you, and it does, keep your feet on the ground, and it does keep you focused. And I've seen around me over the many years and many different situations that I've been in, people that lose it. They lose focus, and they lose their feet, come off the ground, and they get carried away with fame or fortune or the spotlight or money or and down the plug hole they go. It's in one way or another. So it's always good to be mindful about keeping your feet on the ground and keeping focused and not getting carried away with all the stuff that goes with it. Looking at. I've got the book out in front of me. I've been flicking a couple of pages over it. I've been going through my notes. Yeah. And I could talk to you for hours, and I don't think we'd even scrape the surface, because there's just so much there. And I mean, just, geez, like an incredible life lived so far, and just so many amazing stories and people, and just what you've achieved. It's just, and for me, I play bass, and I play bass in a metal band, and
oh, okay.
And yeah, it's just, reading your story. It's inspiring to see how you've grinded away over the years and just achieved what you have. And yeah,
I know there's an awful lot of information in there, and it's a very eventful.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I mean, some of the stuff I had to leave out because it would have been like I think how many pages is it? About 400 pages or something? Or?
Yeah, about 300 and something. Yeah,
300 and something. Yeah. If I'd have put every little detail in and everything that happened, it'd be 1,500 pages, So that's all the main events and the main, bands and things that happened. And people have been very kind, They take the time to write really, really nice reviews about the book. If you go onto Amazon and have a look at the reviews that people have left, whether it's in America or the UK or wherever, they absolutely love the book. And they've been very kind in the way, taking the time to explain how it affected them and how they liked it and how informative it is and all the rest of it. So it's if any of them are listening, I thank you.
Well, I think I better go and do the same as well. I'll leave a nice review on there on Amazon for you because great book, and it opened up a lot to me, and it gave me a lot of reassurance. Just a lot of parallels of the way that I've sort of taken steps and risks in my life with music and tried things and started talking to people that I might have been a little bit reluctant to talk to, but then the benefits that come out of reaching out to people and trying things and saying yes to stuff, and you've done a lot of that over the years, so it's been great. So I'll make sure that people know how to grab the book so they can get it from Amazon, and also I've got a bunch of Aussie listeners, and many of them, well, when we could travel, could go to Sydney and go to Utopia and pick up a...
Yeah, Utopia, they have signed copies in there because every once in a while they'll phone me up and say, you got any more, and I'll drop them off.
Yeah, well, I've got one of them in front of me here, so it's...
oh, okay, great.
Yeah, it says nice little keepsake with your handiwork in the front cover.
Yeah.
Well, I think you guys better go and get that book after I've referenced it so many times in that chat. I've just, it's, as I said, it's one of the best books I've read when it comes to the whole rock and metal biographies, autobiography sort of genre of books, and it's absolutely fantastic. I cannot recommend it enough, and I think that chat with Bob hopefully gives you just a little bit of an insight as far as the types of stories and the things that he talks about in his book, because it's just absolutely incredible. Just a really great collection of stories, and the way that he's documented it with the photos included is just, it's you can't put the book down. It's absolutely fantastic. So go and grab, for fact's sake. You can go and find the links in the show notes over at andysocial.net or andydowling.net. You can go and check out Bob's world by going to bobdaisley.com. You can grab the book from Amazon as well as Utopia Records. So I have all the links in the show notes. Nice and easy. But yeah, if you're a rock and metal fan, especially from those eras, you need to grab this book. It's tops. It's absolutely fantastic. So make sure you go and check that out. And what a thrill to be able to talk to Bob Daisley. That's one that we've been trying to tee up for a while, and we finally got around to it, and just was not disappointed. An absolute legend, a lovely guy, and just stoked to be able to talk to him and be another guest on the Andy-Social podcast. So there you go. Now, before we wrap it up, if you want to support me, you can go to Patreon. Patreon.com/Andy Dowling is the place to go to support the Andy-Social podcast in everything that I'm involved with, and support starts from only $1 a month, so you can just set and forget it if you just want a little feel-good payment. But there are additional tiers there where you get access to exclusive things, including a weekly podcast that comes out through Patreon, so you can go and check all that out. Otherwise, share these episodes around. If you've got any mates that love a bit of 70s and 80s and 90s rock and metal, definitely share this episode around to your mates and get them to check it out. But thank you so much for supporting the podcast and listening through. I'm going to have more fantastic guests on the coming weeks. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I'm recording these intros and outros directly after I got off the call from Bob, so I'm in a bit of a whirlwind. Had a bit of a fanboy moment with Bob, so I'm coming down from that, so I have no idea who's coming next week, but I promise it'll be a good one, so stay tuned for that. Until then, take care, folks, and ta-ta.